auspicious that the conference is actually here. The India Center is here in the School of Politics. We're a school because we have a whole bunch of different centers as well as an academic faculty inside the school. The most prolific of those centers is the India Center under the guidance of Yogesh Joshi, and this is like introduced the center to a whole new level of activity. The school, like India, very, very big. The university, like India, is enormous. We have 70,000 plus students here. When I first came here some 29 years ago, we had 25,000 students. That's what you call growth, right? So you start to understand the parallels and the chaos and the change that can come through that in these rapid growths. And that's why I think that yesterday's keynote speaker, the distinguished lecture by Dr. Vivek Lal, I think some of the things that he said there fit really, really nicely with what we try to do as the mission of the school and what the India Center is attempting to do here. And that is he talked about 6 buckets. For me, the most important ones of those buckets was actually policy and politics and bureaucracy. Right? This is what we specialize in. But what Yogesh is doing with the center is including technology and other aspects and engineering, etc. And that's what he find really interesting. But you can't understand how tech industries work. You can't understand how trade works unless you understand politics. Which is why I think this is the perfect conference to be held at this particular time, tying these different things back together. So without further ado, I think welcome. I'm looking forward to hearing some of the talks here. I actually have a day job, so I won't be able to stay all day. I'm a fireman in a different life. I put out fires on the campus. It takes up a lot of my time, but I will be here as much as possible to hear these really interesting talks. Yogesh?
Thank you so much, Bruce, for opening the conference and for those very kind words to the India Center. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the annual India conference hosted by the UCF India Center. It is great to see our guests and speakers at UCF, either present physically or joining us through Zoom. I welcome you all to the conference, and we are grateful for your participation and contributions. At the UCF India Center, we pride ourselves on being an incubator of ideas, education, and research on contemporary India. Our center is dedicated to exploring and understanding the ever-evolving journey of India. Today's conference themed Capturing Change in India, Technological Transitions, Economic Transformations, and Evolving Global Footprint offers a comprehensive lens through which to examine this evolution. Over the years, India has witnessed profound changes. Economically, the liberalization of early 1990s set in motion a transition from an inward-looking economy to one that is diversified and globally integrated. While sectors like information technology, manufacturing, and services have flourished, challenges such as regional disparities and the dynamics of its informal sector continue to shape its path. In parallel, India's technological transformation has nothing been short of revolutionary. From the widespread adoption of digital technologies to groundbreaking strides in space exploration, the nation is at the forefront of innovation. Government initiatives like Digital India and Make in India have played pivotal roles in fostering this change, impacting everything from governance to education to healthcare and national security. Moreover, as India navigates an increasingly multipolar world, its foreign policy has evolved significantly. With a history of non-alignment giving way to strategic partnerships, India is emerging as a key player on global stage. Its recalibrated approach to international relations not only strengthens its regional leadership, but also offers fresh perspectives on global challenges. This conference fosters dialogue and debate on these interrelated themes: economic transitions, technological revolutions, and evolving global footprints. We are honored to bring together leading scholars, practitioners, and policy experts who will share their insights and contribute to a deeper understanding of India's dynamism, as well as several challenges it confronts, both internally as well as in a rapidly evolving global environment. The annual India Conference is more than just an event. It is a platform that cements UCF India Center's role as a hub for cutting-edge research and policy analysis on contemporary India. For our community at UCF, and particularly for the School of Politics, Security and International Affairs, this conference provides a unique opportunity to network with prominent scholars and policy analysts to enrich our academic pursuits and engage in conversations that will shape the future of India's studies. Our rich program of discussions and panels today will begin with a keynote address by Dr. Ajay Kumar. Dr. Kumar is a distinguished Indian Administrative Service officer whose career has marked a steadfast commitment to public service and transformative governance. He retired as the Secretary of Defense from Government of India, but over his long career, Indian bureaucracy held several high-impact positions within the government, especially relevant to India's technological transformation. He was Secretary in the Department of Defense Production, Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, and the Director General of National Informatics Center. He was part of the team that implemented Digital India initiatives in 2014, which included Unified Payments Interface, Aadhaar, MyGov.in, Government e-Marketplace, and Jeevan Praman. Dr. Kumar's scholarly achievements are equally phenomenal. He joined the Indian Civil Services after his bachelor's in electrical engineering from IIT Kanpur, but during his long bureaucratic assignments with Government of India, also pursued a master's in development economics and a PhD in business administration from University of Minnesota. His academic outputs will easily outcompete established scholars in the field. He's currently a distinguished professor at IIT Kanpur. Lastly, after retirement, Dr. Kumar played a pivotal role in creating a venture capital fund for technology startups in India, which is today helping the startup ecosystem in India to unleash its animal spirits and help the country realize its potential in transforming its technological landscape. For his keynote address titled From Assembly to Innovation, India's Defense Industry Transformation through iDEX, not only highlights major shifts in India's defense industry ecosystem, but also captures the essence of the theme of today's conference. I will now invite Dr. Ajay Kumar to give his keynote address to the conference. Dr. Kumar, welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. A very, very good morning to all of you. It's a privilege and honor to be speaking at the annual India conference at the India Center of University of Central Florida. And I'm really happy to share with you some of my experiences with respect to how India has actually changed from being a hub of assembly to fairly vibrant in the innovation ecosystem in the country. Let me straight away jump into the subject of my talk. If we were to look at, this is for the first time in India that the Indian defense ecosystem is buzzing with optimism. Stocks of the defense companies are soaring on the Indian stock exchanges. Venture funds and angel investors are vigorously hunting for defense startups. That was something unknown. And for the first time, India is not merely an importer of defense equipment, but has also become a defense exporter. And India's defense export has grown from 14 billion rupees, Indian rupees, in 2016-17 to nearly 250 billion Indian rupees in this financial year, which is reflective of about 15x growth over the last 6 to 7 years. So what has changed? If we look back to 2017 and 18, the scenario was very different. And it was not that India did not have a defense industry at that point of time. In fact, even at that time in 17-18, India had a largish defense industry. Our defense industry turnover was nearly 750 billion Indian rupees at that time. And two of our companies, the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited and the Ordnance Factory Board, figured in CIPRI's top 100 defense and aerospace companies of the world. We had shipyards which had made over 1,000 ships. However, all these companies who were doing defense production, they were largely assembly shops. And they were assembling defense platforms based on transfer of technology from other countries and other OEMs. The problem with this model was that these transfer of technology agreements, and that is usually the industry practice, are notoriously one-sided and are heavily in favor of the seller. The critical know-why is rarely transferred, and only know-how, which is just enough to carry out the assembly task, is shared. But even this limited transfer excludes key components or subsystems, particularly those involving critical technologies, ensuring that the buyer nations cannot independently manufacture the platform. As a result, it causes a long-term dependency on the seller company, both for future production as well as for maintenance, repairs, and spare parts. Further, these agreements also restrict the number of units that can be produced, and therefore, the country who cannot produce more units in case they need to. It limits upgrades and improvements by withholding interfaces to critical systems and impose stringent export restrictions, again requiring seller nation approval for exporting locally manufactured defense equipment. And to top it all, such transfer of technology contracts frequently include provisions for perpetual royalty payments, even if hundreds or thousands of such pieces have already been produced, and full capability to produce these pieces is now available in the country. And the transfer of technology fees is quite exorbitant, resulting in that the cost of the products which were manufactured in the country based on TOT is often costlier than what it would be if the same products were to be imported. But it was not only that that in India, most of the products were based on transfer of technology. The second problem was that the Indian defense industry was largely cornered by public sector undertakings. And these undertakings were working on a cost-plus model with no incentive to compete in the commercial market because they were getting confirmed assured orders from the Indian Armed Forces. All this had actually led to, even if we had a largish defense industry, it did not result in creation of a self-reliant defense ecosystem or an industry which could participate at a global level. It was only in 2017-18 that the things started to change. And it took several big policy decisions which helped to turn the tide. Some of these decisions which India took was, of course, as part of Make in India, there was delicensing and other ease of doing business reforms which were taken. A positive indigenization list was created, and in fact, several of such lists were indicated where armed forces indicated the list of items which they would be needing over the next 3 to 5 years, and which was signal to the industry that they could start indigenizing those items. There was earmarking of capital procurement budget. The government earmarked part of its budget for domestic industry. And in addition, government also said that the domestic budget, the budget earmarked for domestic industry would not only be for public sector, but a part of that would further be specifically be earmarked for private sector. But in addition to all of this, to me, what has made the biggest difference was the program called Innovation for Defense Excellence, iDEX, which was launched by Prime Minister Modi in 2018. The iDEX program involved using the startups for solving problems faced by armed forces. There were a lot of people who doubted the success of this program to begin with. And that's not surprising because, as we all agree, developing military technology is not easy. And therefore, to ask startups to start solving military problems was quite a bold decision. However, as it turned out, in a very short time, iDEX turned out to be a big game changer. One of the first surprises that we received was within a year or so, the Indian Ministry of Defense received a request from the US Embassy in Delhi informing that a top US defense lab had interest to collaborate with an Indian startup. This was surprising given the fact that in India, we were accustomed to seeking technology. And here, for the first time, we had a request from nowhere else but US Defense Lab wanting to collaborate with one of our startups on a defense project. Thereafter, very soon, another Indian startup who had started less than a year back designed and developed drones and was able to sell to the Indian Armed Forces in the Northern Command. It was the first time when an Indian designed and developed product of advanced technology way back in 2019 was procured by Indian Army. Give you yet another example. There was another startup which took up a challenge under iDEX to develop a 100-megapixel camera. This camera, the Indian Defense was importing for an exorbitant price for years. The startup not only developed the camera in about 12 months, but offered to make 1 gigapixel camera, something which only very, very few leading defense companies in the world are able to do. There's yet another startup which developed a 1,000 drone show, which was performed by them on the Republic Day celebrations in 2022. The cost of developing this whole show was what a foreign vendor who had also earlier participated in a bid to do that show, for doing one show, was the total development cost of this show by this particular startup. And all it took to this startup was about 4 months to develop this show. In fact, this startup today is going all over the world and performing with their nearly 5,000 drone shows now. So what did we see in iDEX actually? What we saw was the 3 S's: speed, scale, and spend. In terms of speed, in defense, where we were used to waiting for years, 8 years, 6 years, 10 years for solving problems, here were startups who were coming up with solutions in 12 to 18 months. Second was scalability. I mean, there are tens of thousands of small systems and critical technologies which were being imported for various platforms. In an earlier model, between DRDO and the PSUs that we had, a handful of these were taken up at a time. But iDEX provided a scalable platform. Very soon, in fact, we had thousands of startups who started participating in the challenges that were thrown up by iDEX, and hundreds of, in fact, as we speak, there are about 2,000 startups who are actively involved with the defense problem ecosystem, and over 500 different problems are concurrently being solved at a time. And this kind of scalability was just not possible in the earlier ecosystem. But the third S, the spend, was even more surprising and impressive. Unlike in the previous model, where all defense projects involving defense R&D would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, under the iDEX scheme, a startup was given assistance of about 15 million rupees, which is about $160,000 only. And with this small amount, they were able to come up with responses. The remaining amount was invested by the startups themselves, and they were able to come up with products and solutions and technologies which could actually be deployed for the armed forces. I must add, however, this while we started with $15 million Indian rupees, 15 million Indian rupees, this amount is since been raised from 15 million to 100 million under what is called iDEX Prime Challenges, and 250 million rupees under what is called iDEX Aditi Challenges. Yet, very small amounts as compared to what the traditional models of R&D used to spend. Like I mentioned, all of this resulted in a large number of startups which were participating. Later on, in 2022, when the space ecosystem was opened up in the country, defense was the first sector for which the startups started taking up challenges. And 75 challenges were launched for space in the country. And in a very short span of time, we have nearly 300 space startups which are driving deep tech space ecosystem in India. The main impact which iDEX has created is not only that they are creating new technologies. What it has been able to do is that it has been able to, for the first time, show that in India, new technology and innovations could be developed. And giving this confidence, which has resulted, and the biggest proof of this was when the innovations and products developed by iDEX were actually deployed by the armed forces. It showed that the solutions produced by these startups were inferior to none, and sometimes better than the best in class in the world. The second thing which we recognized after some time was the best performing startups were in emerging technology areas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, drones, and they excelled in this. For example, one of the startups developed a solution for quantum key distribution over fiber, and they were able to achieve distances which were 60% higher than the best that had been achieved anywhere in the world at that point of time. This confidence which came about of being able to innovate products by startups also rubbed on to other players. Bigger defense industry players also started initiating development of platforms without even waiting for government assistance and orders. The defense public sector undertakings, which were earlier mere assembly platforms, now activated their own innovation ecosystems and R&D teams. And in a matter of 3 years, they filed nearly 2,000 patents with respect to the work they were doing. An example of this was Mazagon Docks shipyard, which is the biggest defense shipyard in the country and which had made hundreds of ships over the last 40, 50 years. For the first, which all of them, of course, were based on technology which was transferred, for the first time, decided to sanction design and development of a prototype of a midget submarine, which was again a first for India. As a result, a huge transformation started to happen in India. And what it implied for Make in India was that Indian industry and Indian Make in India, which had largely been about manufacturing services and about digital services, it had not been creating its own technology or developing its own intellectual property. For the first time through iDEX, they started producing products. In fact, iDEX showed that products could be developed in India. And this could be actually be start of a new vision for Make in India, which one could call Make in India 2.0, which would be where India would not merely be doing manufacturing or providing services, but actually be making products in the country. Let me, before I conclude, let me also mention that while the Indian startups in defense and space have started making world-class products and have started getting traction in the domestic Indian market, the next aspiration for them is to grow global and to be able to cater to the larger global market. If we look at the Indian defense and space startup journey, it has several resemblances to the Israel startup stories of the 1990s. And if in Israel, the unit 8200 of the IDF played a key role, in India, it has been the India MOD which has played a similar role. But for the first time, because some of these startups are making world-class products, what we are seeing that these Indian startups are now trying to go global and are particularly collaborating with ecosystem in the United States to go global. The Indian-US Comprehensive Global and Strategic Partnership between the two countries, which is rooted in trust and family bonds, offers unique advantages for such growth for these startups. Let me give you that this is a trend which has already started to happen and is possibly likely to grow much bigger in the coming years. For example, in 2023, third iTech, an iDEX startup winner, signed a cooperative research and development agreement with the US Space Force and US Air Force Research Lab to undertake work for them. Another Indian iDEX winner, New Space and Research Technologies, also secured cooperative research and development agreement with US AFRL and is in talks with the US military. Estrom, yet another iDEX winner in wireless broadband, is already entered the US market and is in talks with some of the telecom majors. Each of these startups is hoping for their inflection point, which could make a transformative milestone in their growth journey and provides a huge opportunity for further deepening of bonds of strategic partnership and friendship between India and the US. In fact, the recent announcements between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, including the US-India Compact, the framework for US-India major defense partnership for the 21st century, the Autonomous System for Industry Alliance, and US-India Trust Initiative. Each of this builds up on the kind of collaboration which has been created through iDEX under its former IndusX program, which has brought the startup ecosystems in India and US together to solve common challenges in defense which are being faced. These initiatives not only reaffirm the strong and growing US-India defense and strategic ties, but are platforms which are going to shape the innovation ecosystem in these sectors world over. I will conclude, and I'm happy to take any questions.
If anyone has questions, here, I'll hand it over to Yogesh.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar, for that brilliant exposition on the evolving landscape of defense innovation in India, but also the technological, and I would say, which is also in some sense related to how India fared economically in terms of even economic frameworks. It also kind of relates to the change in economic frameworks, which guides the Indian state. That transition towards startups from public sector undertakings also kind of relates to that fact. I'm going to start this conversation with a few questions of my own before we open it up to the floor. So, you know, as somebody who has worked and is interested because of my own research of how India innovates, or for that matter, pursues technological diffusion, I cannot but notice that in the Cold War, especially the India-Russia relationship, happened under public undertakings, right? Mostly. And that is also because how defense innovations were pursued in Russia, and being a closed economy, public undertakings were basically taking the helm in India. On the other hand, when you contrast that to today, an India-US relationship, you see a lot of private players in the market, driving this relationship. What is different, between that era and today, and how has the market played a role? We kind of sometimes forget what the economic models which drive the state also has an implication for not only innovation systems, but our partners for that matter. So there's always a question on India-Russia defense relationship and India-US defense relationship. But I think this whole idea of how the change in Indian economy is also driving these two very different relationships in defense comes out very clearly in your lecture. So could you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great question. If you ask me, we've theoretically we opened up the Indian defense sector for private in 2001. And yet, like I explained to you, in 2017-18, the contribution of the private defense industry was less than 2% to the overall defense procurement made in India. And I'm, of course, talking of domestic industry procurement. There were challenges also, which I kind of referred to earlier. For example, the public sector undertakings who were involved in manufacturing were doing manufacturing or assembly based on cost plus basis, and they would not have competition. And DRDO, which was involved in defense R&D, was again a monopoly, and was and there was there was no competition there again. But more importantly, in each of this, when DRDO was doing something, the number of activities that DRDO could do at a point of time were limited. Whereas once the whole ecosystem was opened up, and especially under iDEX, it was now like saying that instead of the capability of about 30,000, 40,000 DRDO scientists, we are actually throwing up, we are mobilizing the capability of maybe 100 million engineers or scientists in the country, because anyone could now participate in these iDEX challenges if they thought they had a solution. And it was without the big difference which really happened by this opening up was the nation's capabilities were mobilized for solving problems, where earlier it was only that of the public sector. And I think that made a huge change. We continue to support the public sector because we think they provide a certain strength to the ecosystem. And so our whole effort has been to support the public sector and encourage the private sector and the startup ecosystem to be able to galvanize or to be able to create more vibrancy in the whole ecosystem. But what has definitely changed now, and which again I tried to mention in my talk, was while earlier the focus was on assembly and production, now the focus has shifted to innovation and R&D. And therefore, increasingly, whether it is the private sector, whether it is the startups, or whether it is the public sector entities, each one of them is trying to make sure that they innovate their own technologies to the extent possible. Having said that, let me not go away with the impression that India is doing everything itself. In fact, decades of technology dependence cannot go in a few years. And while there is a lot of optimism and a lot of new technologies that have been developed in the last 3-4 years, this is still tip of the iceberg. We continue to source a large number of technologies with our foreign partners and OEMs. And I think that will continue for a few more, maybe a decade or so. But we will see, like again, something which I mentioned briefly in my comments was that in emerging technology areas, increasingly, we see greater innovation and development of new technologies, and that would, that would possibly shape the future of new weapons, new platforms, new equipment for defense, which will become increasingly developed in the country as well.
Thank you so much. If I can just ask you to elaborate a bit further on that, what kind of cooperation or interest are we seeing? We had Dr. Vivek Lal yesterday over here, and he was mentioning that a number of US private sector defense manufacturers and R&D hubs are now mentoring and are interested in startups in India, and they are actively mentoring them. What kind of relationships do Indian startups have with other countries such as Russia, France, UK, or Israel for that matter? Where would you apportion the concentration of cooperation within these countries with the Indian startups?
Yeah, so let me, yeah, and that's again a great question. I mean, first of all, I like to upfront saying that there is no parallel to India's relationship with US as far as defense innovation ecosystem is concerned. India does not have that relationship with anyone else as of now, and honestly speaking, I don't see that happening also, at least in near future. Of course, we will see some cooperation, but mostly I think it will be more in terms of trade related and not a partnership related cooperation that we see in India and US. And I'd like to elaborate on that. But before that, because let me explain, the relationship with India and Russia was extremely very different. And that was, when I talk about, it's a relationship which goes back in time. Uh, and that relationship, of course, was largely transfer of technology based relationship, where Russia was offering its technology for assembly based production in India. While it did provide a fairly biggish defense industry ecosystem, I also mentioned some of the limitations of that ecosystem. And therefore, that model is something which is today becoming less, because of the various constraints which I mentioned in my talk. I think today that model is not something which is a preferred model for going forward. When it comes to India and US, today we see increasingly there is under the IndusX, there are joint challenges that are being thrown up for Indian startups and US startups, same challenges being developed by startups on both sides. There is a very strong collaboration between Department of Defense in the US side and Ministry of Defense on the Indian side. There is, as Dr. Vivek Lal mentioned, a number of defense OEMs are today working closely to be able to work with Indian startups and innovate. Today, as you know, India is the world's largest GCC, Global Capability Center, where large number of defense and non-defense companies have their development centers in India. There is increasing confidence of India's ability to do R&D at a relatively cheaper cost. Defense OEMs are also discovering that new innovative technologies which they can incorporate in their platforms are happening. We have, for the first time, a defense fab of US being set up in India only to cater to defense requirements in the US. We see increasing amount of, especially in the aerospace sector, a number of Indian companies, a whole lot of supply chain which used to be, in other parts of the country, in other parts of the world, several of those are now shifting to India. And particularly, we see this happening in the aerospace sector. So there are multiple levels at which these collaborations are happening. And, OEM to MSMEs, OEMs to startups, startups to startups, government to government, and so on and so forth.
Right, thank you so much. Right from the time of D.S. Kothari and B.D. Nagachaudhary, when the DRDO was set up, I always remember P.V.R. Rao's, your predecessor way back in 1960s, who was Defense Secretary just immediately after the India-China war. The question has always been the tussle between the user and the developer. And the Indian military has not been able to, as in the case of other countries, integrate it with the development model. So there's always this question of the military asking for military effectiveness in terms of armaments. On the other hand, the public sector undertakings basically talking about technological self-sufficiency. How is this gap now bridged, both in terms of military's involvement as not only a user, but also giving inputs in the development of of these technological solutions to its needs, but also in terms of military effectiveness of these platforms?
So, one of the, yeah, I'm sorry, you want to say something, Yogesh?
No. Please go ahead.
Okay. So, one of the things, which is generally believed is that if you can sell something to the Indian Armed Forces, you can sell it anywhere in the world. Since they are tough customers to satisfy. But today, what has happened is that because the kind of products that are being innovated are something which are best in class, a large number of these, there's a huge willingness to be able to buy from some of these indigenous sources. And that is one of the transformations which has come about today, where that's what I meant by when I said that, there is greater confidence in being able to, greater willingness to buy from what has been innovated in India. Part of that confidence also comes from the fact that people who are developing this are actually not only selling to the Indian Armed Forces, but are selling to elsewhere in the world. And I gave some examples of how even they are even now today working with US Armed Forces or US, NASA and other such, organizations in the US. These are great validations for the kind of work that's happened. I mean, it's never happened before in Indian history that India has actually exported new technology products. Whatever we had exported in the past would be something which would be built on transfer of technology, and with the permission of the selling country, we would then re-export it to another country. But for the first time, we are seeing a new trend where Indian technology is actually being accepted in other parts of the country. And exports, like I said, it's still a small number, but the export has grown 15x. I must also say that while private industry is still a small part of the Indian defense ecosystem, it's still about less than 15 to 20% of the whole defense industry ecosystem, which is still largely dominated by the public sector. When it comes to export, it is this small private industry which captures 80% of the export. And this shows that their products are equally in demand outside. And that has made a huge difference, which has created, and it's also, once the confidence sets in, it creates impact on other things as well. So some of the platforms which for DRDO used to find it difficult to be able to convince the user to buy, even those platforms are getting greater acceptance now.
My last question, I don't want others to wait any further. So in your tenure, we also went through the Galwan crisis, right? And that in some sense, and as you mentioned, the Indian military works in tough conditions, but increasingly so, it will be more. Given the geopolitical scenarios, given the power gaps which we confront on our northern border, it's the first time in India's history ever that we have a great power on our immediate borders. It has never happened before. What were the lessons learned in terms of military procurement, military readiness during the Galwan crisis? We kind of saw definitely some very important needs. The Zorawar light battle tank is one of those which came out from the Galwan crisis. Can you talk briefly about what was it like in terms of military readiness and military preparedness, and what did the Galwan crisis teach us, and what lessons were learned, and how are they being implemented today?
Yeah, so, for a large part of our post-independence period, a lot of our defense preparedness had been about our western border with Pakistan. And Pakistan, of course, some part of it is in the Himalayan valley, but a large part of it is in Rajasthan and Punjab, which are all plains and desert areas, where there were different kind of challenges, where temperatures go up to 50 degrees Celsius in summers and that kind of thing, dusty storms. Here, and here, on the Himalayan side, on the northern side, it was not a live border. And there was various agreements under which patrolling was done, but it was not something where the forces were, available 24/7. After the Kalwan crisis, all this changed. Forces were mobilized, and we had forces face to face for some period of time. And there was a number of things which had to be changed, because here we were operating at 15,000, 16,000 feet and above, where winter temperatures would go to -30, wind chill would go to minus further down, and the nature of preparation for keeping the force there was totally different. And you had to have new kind of thermal clothing, thermal tents, ability to have, water, because nothing would remain like water. And of course, tanks, because the kind of heavy tanks that we had you could not take them to such heights. Even so, logistics of being able to keep up the people at that height, all of that was very important. But I think thanks to various friendly nations, we were able to mobilize this force at a very short period of time and ensure that when the pressure was built, requisite response was given, so that the message was sent loud and clear that India was willing to step up its efforts when it counts. But yeah, I mean, the important point is, from equipment and procurement perspective, a whole new requirement was raised with all its respect of its northern border and the complication, the height and the temperature and lack of oxygen brings with those. Today, most of which today is being addressed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. I'll now open it up. There are
people on Zoom who might have
okay, okay, right. So I'll now open it up to the panelists, to the participants over in the room, and then we will go to the Zoom questions. So, Zach, here you go.
Thank you. Hello, Dr. Kumar, and thank you for your insightful remarks. Personally, I'm an admirer of your public work, and whenever you're on a podcast, I make a point of listening to your remarks. I want to build off the last question that was just posed about the situation along the border. As I understand it, the Indian and Chinese militaries have completed the process of disengagement along the last two outstanding friction points, that India's traditional patrolling rights have been restored, and that now we are transitioning into the next phase, which will be de-escalation, and then over the longer term horizon, de-induction. I'd be interested in getting your thoughts on how you see this process playing out over the next few years. You had mentioned that both India and China have existing border agreements to ensure that there's no escalatory behavior, to keep the channels of communication open. Are these border agreements still relevant? Will we need new confidence building measures? Give us your sense of how this is going to play out. Thank you.
Thank you. So of course, my information is possibly, as good or not even as good as yours, for last, ever since I'm outside the government. But yes, I can say this, that as far as forces moving back from the remaining two points that happened during my period. And like you rightly said, now we are moving towards a de-escalation phase. I think it is pragmatic for both countries to recognize that as neighbors and something which they can't change, they need to work out a working relationship. There are disagreements on the border, there are differences on the perceptions of the LAC, and there is history behind it. But and those will not get resolved, I think, overnight, as they say. But they need to have a working relationship which enables them to pursue a path of development and economic progress, which is so important for both these countries and their population. And I think they owe it to their population. I think India has had a very consistent approach. We have never ever tried to, assert a right over someone else's territory. We have never been offensive in a war. We have always only reacted whenever we have found some form of act of aggression against us. And within this broad, and that is part of a national thought process in this regard. I think the important message that was conveyed during Galwan was, while we are very peaceful in our approach and we do not intend to use force for any of our assertions which we think are rightful claims, and I'm not even talking only of Galwan, I'm making it as a general proposition across all kind of conflicts. We said that we have made clear that even if the opponent if the opponent tries to do something which is unfair and unjustified and eyeing our rights, we are fully competent to defend ourselves, and we will go to any extent to defend ourselves. And I think that message was, taken in the right spirit, and I think it's heartening to see that things are today moving in the right direction in terms of greater normalization. But this normalization is not going to happen in a short period of time. My own feeling is it'll take effort on both sides to continue this process and take it forward. And it will be in the larger interest of both countries, as well as in the larger interest of the peace of the world.
Okay, any other questions on the panel?
Thank you, Ajay. You talked about the 3 S's, the speed, scale, and spend. Now, going forward, what would it take from investment aspects to be able to accelerate this? And does it also affect other industries? Because the defense industry is clearly the one you're focused on. But in the US, there's been a lot of spin-offs by investing in defense. And does that enable, and is there a focus on industries that, whether it's healthcare, life sciences, AI, computing, and others that could benefit? And what's the plan for going forward in India? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think, again, it's a great question. And this is something on which I write, and I do work on this, a little bit of sharing my thoughts now and then. I think so. iDEX did have tremendous impact on other sectors. Let me see, and while I was there in office, we used to have requests from other ministries who would want to have iDEX-like programs. Having said that, I think one of the things which differentiated Defense Ministry from other ministries was that what we innovated, we were ourselves the procurers or users of it. And therefore, we created mechanisms to be able to procure the innovations which were satisfying the needs of the armed forces. So we created special rules and provisions for that. And I think that was great help. In other sectors, when innovation is carried out, the ministry or the government itself may be a small users. And I think they have had much more difficult time to be able to procure those innovative procurements. Our government financial regulation sometimes creates hurdles in terms of getting, at least 3 bidders for a procurement to be completed successfully. And of course, when you're looking at innovative procurement, that would not happen. So there have been some difficulties which have been faced while trying to do a horizontal spread of the iDEX program in other sectors. No, even though there has been desire to do that, I think the problem of while iDEX has succeeded in defense and continues to grow as we see, its larger widespread impact in India would require policy reforms where government will have to move, and this is where I mentioned very briefly about Make in India 2.0. Some policy reforms will be required by government to be able to actually promote domestic innovation in its overall way of thinking. Because if you look at India as a country has largely been services country, whether it is manufacturing services, digital services, and so on and so forth. And product defense was the first, if I may say, first case where such successful effort of developing technologies or products was taken up. And now to spread it on other sectors, I think government is trying. I mean, government has this, in this budget, government has announced a 1 lakh crore R&D fund, which is about like $12 billion R&D fund for the private sector, which is the first time in India that such a big amount for private sector R&D support by government has been announced. The modalities of that are being finalized so that greater role can be given to the private sector for development of products and R&D. But I think those are still to come out, but that's a good, very, very good, encouraging step. But I think a lot more policy level changes, because, I have a whole paper on it, I can talk about it. There's several measures that need to be taken to, in whether it is in terms of being able to procure within the government, whether it is able to create standards which are derived from the new innovations, whether it is in terms of bypassing or not insisting on the requirement of at least 3 bidders for every procurement. So several of these policy reforms may be required before we can really see the larger benefits of product development in India in other sectors. And that's what I think.
Any other questions from the room? Yeah, Trisha, I'll come to
you. Thank you for your talk, Dr. Kumar. Trisha, in case you're not able to see me. You briefly talked about the conditions in which soldiers in Galwan were operating in, particularly harsh climates. There's often issues of isolation. This question might be a little tangential, but I wonder if you've seen any promising technological interventions for the mental health of soldiers, and if you've seen some products in your procurement role.
Yeah, so when you ask me, I mean, this is not an area where I really have great knowledge, but I do remember when you say this, some of my colleagues in the Armed Forces Medical Services talk about some of the initiatives they had taken. But honestly speaking, I will have to collect that information and get back to you. I'm not able to recollect what those initiatives were, but you're absolutely spot on. There were these challenges, and there were some initiatives taken by our medical colleagues in the armed forces to deal with it. But I'm so sorry, I just don't offhand recollect some of those.
Right. So we'll wait for our Zoom participants. If they have any questions, they can just raise their hands on Zoom, and we'll go back to them. But we're short on time as well, and we don't want to keep Dr. Kumar away from his dinner. Thank you so much, sir. But before I let you go, let me ask one more question. So I'm still wondering whether what can, universities and human capital. So startups are fundamentally about human capital, right? What kind of policy innovations and policy interventions are being made by the government of India to create that human capital? That will be one of the major challenges. But also, what can be done in terms of leveraging partnerships, whether it is with universities in India, whether it is universities in the US, just as UCF for that matter, or other friendly countries. Is there, because at the end of the day, when we are looking at a technological landscape of innovation, fundamentally it is about human capital. Is there some thought? I know that you yourself have started Fund-Kavachh, which kind of provides venture capital development funds to startups. But what else can be done to build up that human capital?
So, and again, it's a great question. I think one of the things which India possibly needs to do more is doing, but still needs to do more, is to develop its capabilities, especially in emerging tech areas, so that it is able to continue its available talent, and the youth. It provides meaningful opportunities for its youth as well. The challenge sometimes comes is that the good institutions like the IITs have limitations in scalability, whereas some of the other institutions suffer in quality. I think one of the opportunities is and there are various collaborations which are today, and I'm sure UCF is also partnering with various institutions in India. IIT Kanpur is partnering with a few US universities, trying to see how today the Indian academic system offers far more greater flexibility to partner with foreign universities. I think we need to figure out ways by which greater mentorship and scholarship can be provided for students at both ends in these institutions, and leveraging the knowledge and expertise that is available in these institutions. Particularly, for example, from the Indian perspective, I can say that if US universities were open to idea of enabling some of the startups in India who are showing promise, and incubate them, provide some kind of guidance or mentorship from an academic perspective, I'm sure there'll be a number of startups who would be willing to use that kind of a facility. And I must share with you that under Fund-Kavachh, which is the venture capital, we have created a platform called iPact, which is about enabling such collaboration by Indian startups to particularly expand their activities into the US. And we are extremely keen to see how we could collaborate with US universities to enable these startups associations in the US, with landing initially in the universities and then growing into the US market. And that would be one possible way. We would be very happy to see if we can explore further collaboration.
Thank you. With that positive note, I just want to express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Kumar for giving the keynote to this conference and hitting all the right notes, which will allow us to cogitate and think and connect to issues which gonna be discussed in the next three panels. Dr. Kumar, thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to Dr. Kumar. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, and wish you a great conference. Thank you very much.